And what is being discussed is that drones were launched directly from Iranian territory, which struck and disabled Iran's air defense systems around cities and around those military facilities that were ultimately targeted by Israeli strikes later on. This is the first distinctive feature. In addition, other technical means and capabilities were also used to disable Iran's air defense systems in order to ultimately make this possible. Furthermore, the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, actually established a secret base for strike drones on Iranian territory from which the attacks were launched. Isn't that a web, after all? There you have it. This is real. This actually happened. The reason I'm emphasizing this is because this is already an example where we are not the ones following someone else's lead, but rather others are taking a page from Ukrainian actions, from the actions of the Ukrainian Special Services, the Security Service of Ukraine. We can see that, in fact, our partners, and I would still prefer to consider Israel more of a partner, even though they have their own unique stance, well, I would like to see Israel on Ukraine's side. All the more so, considering that, after all, we have to understand that Iran has done nothing good for Ukraine either, and Iran has continued to supply Russia with weapons. Now, Iran will no longer be able to supply as actively, because Iran has been weakened, that's one thing. Secondly, Iran is now facing very serious problems, and these problems have arisen both in the economy, in the political sphere, and in the military-industrial complex. I'll talk a bit more about this in a moment, because the targets that were struck directly on Iranian territory are related both to the production of ballistic missiles and to the production of drones. So, at the very least, the potential to increase assistance to Russia simply won't exist. It won't be there. Not to mention transferring existing ones, because after all, in response to Israeli attacks, Iran launched a large number of ballistic missiles at Israel. And of course, it will need to replenish its own stockpiles in order to prepare for possible future attacks like these from Israel. And they are constantly living with this propaganda, saying there will be acts of retaliation, that they will pay back, they will avenge everything, so be prepared and so on. This is always clear when it comes to Iran from their propaganda side. Therefore, Russia will no longer receive these weapons, which is very good for us. And now the IDF is adopting experience from Ukraine, as is clearly seen from Operation Web. Israel used the tactics of the Ukrainian SBU Special Operation Web for its attack on Iran. As reported by Israeli media, the IDF created a secret base. According to Al Jazeera, the Qatari channel, kamikaze drones carried out targeted strikes on surface-to-surface missile launchers at the Asfaghabad military base near Tehran. Mossad agents also placed high-precision weapons near the anti-aircraft systems. When the attack began, the missiles were launched directly from Iranian soil. Another operation involved Mossad installing special devices on vehicles to disable the Iranian air defense system. This is what was actually done. This is what the Israelis themselves actually did. These are the kinds of actions that took place. In other words, it was quite a complex operation. And here's another interesting point that's also worth focusing on, because there is now information that 20 high-ranking Iranian commanders, including the leadership of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' aerospace forces, were killed as a result of the strikes. At least 20. In addition, Ali Khamenei has not made any public appearances or been in contact. He is the supreme spiritual leader of Iran. No one has seen him. Moreover, virtually the entire military leadership was decapitated at once, which undoubtedly creates a very serious crisis and problems. Because obviously there is no such thing as continuity of power, especially in the military, when everything happens at once. And always when there is a senior commander, there is his deputy and then others down the hierarchy. Because especially in wartime conditions, it is necessary to understand who can replace you and so on. Because unfortunately war means loss and destruction. And it is clear that unfortunately someone may be killed and therefore needs to be replaced. So in this case, of course, there will be replacements, but still taking over management, getting up to speed, immediately starting to perform duties and so on. Well, when one or two people are taken out at once, that's understandable. You replace them and it seems like nothing changes. But when it's everyone at once, well, that's quite a significant blow. I think you can agree with that. And it's hard to recover from something like this. And in fact, if we're talking about the response, Iran struck Israel. In principle, Israel managed to intercept the vast majority of the missiles, not to mention the drones. But Iran used a huge amount of its resources to carry out this strike. And these resources won't be going to Russia, that's for sure. That's already a good thing. Russia, by the way, in turn called on Israel to show restraint. So, in fact, they took a stance against Israel. This is not the first time Putin and the Kremlin have spoken out against Israel. This is not the first time that Putin and the Kremlin have condemned Israel's actions. I think the people of Israel should remember this and understand that Russia has long ceased to be an ally of Israel, and in fact never truly was one. Russia is an ally of Syria, which was an ally of Bashar al-Assad, an opponent of Israel. Russia is a friend and strategic partner at the level of signed documents and agreements with Iran and with the Iranian mullahs and other terrorists who demand the destruction of Israel. And now Russia is essentially taking a pro-Iranian stance. That's why I know that many of my friends and subscribers are watching from Israel. I hope that you clearly and fully understand this and that you will convey this position, including to your colleagues and your circle of communication, that there is no need to harbor any illusions that Russia and Israel are friendly or that Russia supports Israel. Absolutely not. Russia supports Iran. Russia supports the enemies of Israel. Officially, at the official state level, there's nothing more to say about that. At the same time, US President Trump supported Israel, stated that the US is not involved in these attacks, but at the same time, he does not condemn them. So, in fact, it can be said that there really is support. And what did Trump say? He previously noted that he had given Iran a chance to make a deal, warning about possible consequences. There have already been many deaths and destruction. But there is still time to put an end to this carnage, because the next planned attacks will be even more brutal. Iran must make a deal before everything is lost, and save what was once known as the Iranian Empire. Apparently Trump actually meant the Persian Empire. Well, but his knowledge of history let him down a bit here. Enough deaths, enough destruction, wrote the US president, adding that Iran must agree to make a deal before it's too late. But the paradox of the situation is that, in fact, with its strike, Israel destroyed the majority of negotiators who were directly conducting talks with the United States and the West regarding the very agreement on lifting sanctions against Iran in exchange for Iran abandoning its uranium enrichment program. Well, frankly speaking, we understand that this is unlikely to happen now, although the pressure will continue. Israel did not stop, and yesterday evening on June 13th, it continued to strike military targets in Iran, as well as facilities of the military-industrial complex. And I think this is not the end yet, that Israel will continue to carry out precision strikes aimed both at eliminating the top ranks of Iran's military and political leadership and directly at military facilities where ballistic missiles, Shahed-type drones, air defense systems, airfields, and oil refineries are stored so that Iran does not actually receive income from oil sales to China and so on. So in this sense, Putin has, of course, encountered very serious problems, because these problems for his ally and friend will only deepen. In fact, it is now obvious that Iran is going through quite a critical period. The West and Israel are exerting very strong pressure. There is a war going on. There are destructive and quite serious strikes. And of course, right now, Iran would like Russia to support it and provide weapons. But will Putin provide weapons? And is he even able to do so? Does he even have enough for himself, given the losses he is suffering in the war against Ukraine? That's the question. And of course, it cannot be ruled out that Russia might actually transfer some air defense systems to Iran, at least to demonstrate something nominally. But so far, this has not happened. So what does this mean for Ukraine? I would describe it as follows. First of all, I would like to point out that even before these attacks, back in 2023, the reputable American agency Bloomberg conducted an investigation. The journalistic investigation concerned the Iranian businessman Hossein Shamkhani. Hossein Shamkhani is the son of the former Iranian Minister of Defense and longtime advisor to Ali Khamenei, Ali Shamkhani, who served as a military and security advisor. So, excuse me, please. So, based on the journalistic investigation, which is extensive and relies on testimony from more than 40 sources from the US, the UK, Iran, and beyond, it was established that the Shamkhani family profited from large-scale arms shipments from Iran to Russia via the Caspian Sea. Since 2023, vessels belonging to the company Krios Shipping LLC, which is controlled by Shamkhani, have been operating between Iran and Russia across the Caspian Sea. These are ships that made corresponding voyages to Astrakhan, located in Russia. In fact, Shamkhani's network encompasses dozens of state-owned dozens of companies, including hedge funds in London, Geneva, and Singapore, as well as companies in Dubai that work with leading Western oil giants. According to Western intelligence, Shamkhani's network may be involved in more than a quarter of Iranian arms shipments to Russia. Bloomberg emphasizes that the scale of Shamkhani's operations demonstrates how deeply military cooperation between Iran and Russia is integrated into global business networks. Well, in fact, this is also an investigation that is now regaining its relevance. It was conducted some time ago, but Shamkhani, Ali Shamkhani, is listed among those killed as a result of a successful Israeli strike. What does this mean? It means that his empire will inevitably suffer. Shamkhani is a trusted figure through whom representatives of the Iranian authorities communicated with both Patrushev and Shoigu, as well as directly with the Russian defense ministers Belyusov and so on, through whom the relevant contacts were established regarding the sale and supply of Iranian weapons to Russia. In other words, he is such a contact person, not only him, but also other representatives of the Al-Quds special unit of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Accordingly, as a result of the attack, they are dead. Therefore, I think this is yet another indicator that at the very least there will be delays and problems in weapon supplies in the near future. At worst, there will be quite serious difficulties, since the circle is changing, because these people are simply no longer in business, well, they are simply no longer involved. And finding a person you can deal with, well, that will be rather difficult and complicated right now. This is also something that in fact needs to be understood. That's why this causes serious problems, along with the fact that Iran is now actively using various types of weapons that cannot be transferred to Russia. It keeps them for itself, plus the death of Shamkhani, plus the death of the leadership that advocated for cooperation with Russia and actively cooperated. Well, of course, and it's important to understand that there are now reports that some Iranian officials, including Shamkhani, gave interviews in which they supported signing the relevant agreement with the West, the one demanded by Trump. And I'll tell you, one thing didn't interfere with the other for them. It absolutely didn't bother them to talk about signing the agreement and at the same time advocate for deepening relations with Russia. It's all very simple, because with the previous signing of the relevant agreement, which was concluded in 2016, Russia was involved, as were the United States, the UN, and countries of the European Union, including some individual countries. So one absolutely does not exclude the other. So that's the situation. How long will it last? And will it lead to a significant increase in oil prices? That question remains open. I don't think this war will escalate into something much larger than it is now, than the exchange of strikes and the weakening of Iran. But I do not rule out that this could end with a coup d'etat in Iran in one form or another. This does not necessarily mean an uprising or large-scale street protests. It could be an internal political coup, a change of the so-called political elites and leaders who might want to shift Iran's course toward rapprochement with the West and distancing from Russia, which would ultimately be very good for us because it would break up one of the enemy's effective alliances. And I'll tell you that during Russia's aggression against Ukraine, Iran has shown itself to be one of the most consistent supporters of Russia, particularly through supplying weapons and more. That's why, frankly, it's very good that it is now being weakened. As for the price of oil, the leaders of the G7 will discuss a new cap on the price of Russian oil at the summit from June 15th to 17th in Canada. EU member countries are ready to support lowering the price cap. However, the position of the United States remains unclear. The EU and the United Kingdom are ready to lead this initiative and act independently with the support of other European countries, the G7 and Canada. It is still unclear what decision the United States will make, although the Europeans insist on a unified approach. Japan's position also remains uncertain. US support is not essential for imposing restrictions due to the dominance of the UK in global maritime insurance and the EU's influence over the tanker fleet. However, the position of the EU and the US becomes important when it comes to oil payments made in US dollars. So, let's wait and see. Indeed, the G7 summit is about to begin soon, and it will be interesting to see what decision is made regarding the oil price cap of no more than $45. That would be very good, and it would negatively affect the Russian economy. This would prevent them from selling oil as they did for $80, $70, or even $60, and from replenishing their own budget, which they then direct toward the war against Ukraine. And it's quite possible that this will happen. Plus, it's important to understand that after a possible coup in Iran, which in my opinion is quite likely, there could also be a redistribution of the Iranian oil and gas market. Western companies and others could enter the market, which would inevitably lead to an actual increase in oil production, especially with supplies going to China and other countries in Asia and Southeast Asia. And as a result, this would lead to a decrease in oil prices on global markets. Therefore, these are also interesting processes that may arise precisely in the course of the new Israeli-Iranian conflict. This is definitely something that needs to be monitored and taken into account as an important factor. So we are eagerly waiting to see how events will unfold. Meanwhile, support for Ukraine from the United States may decrease. For example, German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius is convinced that the US will gradually reduce its support for Ukraine and Europe as a whole. He stated this in an interview with the German publication Tagesschau. Yes, that's right. This will happen, and we have to come to terms with it. The publication quotes Pistorius as saying during a broadcast on ZDF. According to the German defense minister, recently the US Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, spoke only about reducing aid to Ukraine, although previously there had been concerns about a possible halt. As Pistorius noted, it is now necessary to see how much support for Ukraine will decrease and whether Europeans will be able to compensate for it. Meanwhile, at the same time, American Democratic Congressman Salud Karbajal lashed out with criticism at Pentagon Chief Hegseth, noting that he actually got into a dispute with him and subjected Hegseth to a tough questioning on a whole range of issues, including the deployment of the Marine Corps in Los Angeles, the leak of information from a signal chat, and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. After Karbajal asked Hegseth whether he considered political activity and loyalty to Trump to be mandatory conditions for serving in the army, Hegseth replied, "Congressman, you know how ridiculous that question is. You are disgracing this country. Members of Congress from both parties have called on you to resign. You should just get the hell out and let someone competent lead the Pentagon," Karbajal responded. So that's how it is. The discontent in Congress is growing, and that's quite serious because you have to understand that ultimately it's an oversight body that can afford to speak to ministers in that tone and in that manner. Get the hell out, they told Hegseth. But at the same time, the fact that Ukraine might find itself with reduced support from the United States was also confirmed by the Ukrainian president's advisor on strategic issues, Alexander Commission, in a comment to Radio Svoboda during the Globsec conference in the Czech Republic. Commission responded to the words of Pentagon Chief Hegseth, who the day before had announced a reduction in spending on military aid to Ukraine in the US defense budget for the 26th year. According to a clarification by the Associated Press agency, this could mean limiting or completely halting the supply of critically important air defense systems. We are in the biggest war of a generation, and in this war, no country can cope with Russia on its own. That is why support from both Europe and the United States of America is important to us, Commission stated. The Ukrainian government is considering options for deploying critical types of weaponry, including air defense systems, but acknowledges that finding a full-fledged alternative to American systems will be extremely difficult. The entire team is working today to ensure that these solutions are found. But finding an alternative to the Patriot is truly difficult, which is why the situation is so uncertain. Naturally, statements like those from Pete Hegseth, the head of the Pentagon, might only inspire Putin to believe he is on the right track and that the war against Ukraine should continue, since, as you can see, there are such statements from the US. There is some Russian advancement at the front, even if small, there are still tactical successes. As for the Dnipropetrovsk region, by the way, the enemy's goal there is to expand the gray zone, to widen it, and to disrupt our logistics to Pokrovsk. And right now, the strategic goal of the Russian forces during the enemy's summer-autumn campaign on the front is the complete capture of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. At present, this is exactly what the Russian troops are focusing on. In other words, this is the main objective. And therefore, regarding the Dnipropetrovsk region, we should expect many informational and psychological operations from the enemy aimed at spreading panic, claiming that the Russian front will soon directly expand into Dnipropetrovsk as well. We need to be aware of this and be cautious. That is, there will be a lot of issues and a great number of informational attacks. In reality, the enemy is indeed striking the Dnipropetrovsk region right now. Russian military sabotage and reconnaissance groups are trying to operate, as well as drones and KAB bomb strikes. They are expanding the gray zone and are still planning during the summer campaign to fully capture the Donetsk and Luhansk regions and to create a threat to the Dnipropetrovsk region as a means of pressure. In addition, they aim to create threats in the Sumy region, the so-called buffer zone also, as a means of pressuring Ukraine with the goal of achieving and precisely implementing their own positions during possible negotiations, the timing and nature of which remain unknown. Ukraine has not refused, and apparently neither has Russia, but so far the date of the upcoming meeting between the Ukrainian and Russian delegations in Istanbul is unknown, as are the possible negotiation points to be discussed there. We see that the two previous meetings have resulted in nothing except for the exchange of prisoners. This is indeed very important, but the process continues to drag on, and most likely, until Putin sees the results of the summer campaign, he will not make any significant moves.